Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons' first celebrity adversary. Actually, Dungeons and Dragons having adversaries is not new. Dungeons and Dragons has had adversaries for a long time and has adversaries right now. So adversaries have lined up. Non-celebrity adversaries have lined up against Dungeons and Dragons for a long time. There were a lot of, I think at the very beginning, the people who hated Dungeons and Dragons first were wargamers, and they had the most legitimate reason. Dungeons and Dragons absolutely wrecked wargaming. It really just left it in tatters, right? Basically, it Dungeons and Dragons did a very specific maneuver where basically they took wargaming and changed the focus of it and saying, hey, we don't really care about 8-person squads. We care about what this one soldier ate for breakfast and what he says and what she does on her watch, right? Like super focused, right? And so that was a big change. Then you had Bothered Against Dungeons and Dragons, and these were thousands of American parents that were really adversarial toward Dungeons and Dragons. Today, you have a huge amount of grognards who are like, oh, my game is terrible. My chosen identified favorite game gets 4 sales a week rather than 400,000, like when a new book drops. And it's just, so there's like this bitterness about, from the indie tabletop role-playing game scene, and I think a lot of this comes from the OSR, there's just a horrible bitterness that comes out against Dungeons & Dragons. And Dungeons & Dragons has non-celebrity adversaries in that space from the OSR. A lot of them, like, just a strong bitterness for the absolute massive success that Dungeons & Dragons has compared to any indie game, right? And this comes from almost all corners, but most sharply, in my humble opinion, from the OSR. Just a lot of bitter grumbling, and you can see this on like just dozens of channels, maybe well over 100 channels, of like, I hate this, I hate Dungeons & Dragons new D&D canon hardback, and I hate this D&D new canon hardback, and I hate this new D&D, and like it's just a drumbeat of I'm going to talk about D&D and just whine about it, because I get more views whining about Dungeons and Dragons than I do celebrating OSR content. It's absolute nonstop. You see it all the time, right? So there's a lot of channels that are like, that's literally their bread and butter, right? Like, it's just whatever. Actually, not whatever. I'm very much against it. I wish it would end, but it's a reality, right? So, but what we see now is the first real celebrity adversary. So who's Dungeons and Dragons' first real celebrity adversary? And by the way, before we talk about, I'm sorry, I know I'm like putting the lead at the end on this one. Before we talk about celebrity adversaries, Hollywood celebrity adversaries for Dungeons & Dragons, it's had a lot of allies, and let's talk about them. Famously, Robin Williams, Stephen Colbert, Vin Diesel. All of these are, actual real fans. Joe Manganiello is a massive Dungeons & Dragons fan and an actual real Hollywood actor, right? Ann Woll. The list goes on and on and on. But what's interesting is just recently, Dungeons & Dragons has got its first celebrity adversary. Now, I would love to say enemy, right? But I don't think we're there yet, right? And the reason why is the celebrity adversary is Harry Styles. And I've been watching him carefully since this Chris Pine's spit mystery, right? There's this question of if Harry Styles spit on Chris Pines. The internet thinks so. Overall, the internet is like, yeah, this definitely happened, right? And all it would take for this to be shut down is simply for Chris Pines to say, hey, everybody, just calm down. Harry Styles did not spit on me. That has not happened. That has not happened under any context, right? In fact, everybody's waiting for that to happen, and it's not happening. And everybody's like, well, if that didn't happen, if it would take Harry Styles did not spit on me. 7 words. It only takes 7 words from Chris Pines to shut this down, right? But those 7 words never arrived. So everybody really thinks that this did happen, right? So once, and then also I think the nails in the coffin when Harry Styles then went to New York and said, I went to Venice to spit on Chris Pines. So like the evidence is in, right? Like I don't know if we can even call this a mystery anymore. But there are people who are like, there's still a question mark around the situation. But what there is no question mark of is Chris Pines is Elgin the Bard. He carries the banner of Gary Gygax. He carries the banner of Dungeons & Dragons. He carries the banner for every player who has ever played a Bard player character. He carries the banner of Dungeons & Dragons, right? And so for all intents and purposes, right now, with this massive movie coming out, Chris Pine is Dungeons & Dragons to America, to the world, right? And Harry Styles, by spitting on him, has insulted and made himself an adversary to every dungeon master, every Dungeons & Dragons player, every D&D designer, right? And we can never forget what he has done to us, right? Question mark. But like for us, it's pretty clear. Like, and honestly, he said it. He said, I went to Venice to spit on Chris Pines. Like, that's enough evidence for me, right? Like, so basically this is where we have landed, right? And with all this said and done, where where we have finally come out is that we've arrived at a point where Dungeons & Dragons truly has its first celebrity adversary. So it's had celebrity allies for a long time. I would love to say that Harry Styles is an enemy to Dungeons & Dragons, but I don't think he's capable of being an enemy to Dungeons & Dragons. And the reason why is I don't think Harry Styles does anything very deep, right? Like, I don't think he's committed to anything. I think he was committed to being in a boy band. Since then, he's just kind of been floating, right? Like, and so he is absolutely an adversary and has staked himself against the entirety of the D&D community. But he's not. But just like everything else he does it one-cheeked, right? Like just like his acting career, he's a lackluster. I don't think he doesn't really reach the level of enemy, because that would take commitment and dedication and competence, right? And I don't think Harry Styles really has any of those. So he only qualifies as an adversary, right? But Dungeons & Dragons now has its first celebrity adversary. Now, why is that happening right now? Well, it's the new Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves is really changing the ball game and changing where we land as a group of people for Dungeons & Dragons. And so we're going to get all the Hollywood benefits. We are a major Hollywood intellectual property at this point, right? We matter to the world, and we are growing in importance every day. And that means people are going to line up to oppose what we stand for, right? And that's a great question. What do Dungeon Masters stand for? What do Dungeons & Dragons stand for? What do we represent to the world? That's a great question. I'm going to end this video by, one, acknowledging Dungeons & Dragons has its first celebrity adversary. It's Harry Styles, right? So the reality is, oh, and by the way, I had thought about calling for a boycott on Don't Worry, Darling, and I'm like, 8 people are going to see this. What's the boycott going to do? Reduce it to 4, right? Like, so, but I think we should be ready. If Harry Styles has anything that spins up that even has remote success, possible success, and Don't Worry, Darling really didn't fit that model, we should definitely consider not. And at this point, anything that Harry Styles is directly attached to, I'm out. I'm not buying it. I'm not connected to it, because he has identified himself as a Dungeons & Dragons adversary. I am, I'm going to do my best not to advocate for him, not to purchase his products, not to participate in his projects. And I am skipping Don't Worry, Darling. I'm not going to go and help somebody spit on the D&D community, in my humble opinion. So all that's my humble opinion. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Dungeons & Dragons' first celebrity adversary. And I'd also love for you, like, as we emerge into the spotlight, what do we stand for? What do Dungeon Masters stand for? What do Dungeons & Dragons players stand for as a community? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.